Welcome back to another 2D to 3D video. I am Follygon, and in this video I'm going to be showing you my entire digital character sculpting process from beginning to end. Click that subscribe button if you are new around here, and check out my Gumroad link below for courses, tutorials, and my custom brushes. If you want to learn how I do everything in this video, check out the Appeal Academy. That is my online program where you can learn how to make appealing characters just like these here. And if that maybe sounds like a little too much at once, check out my Patreon to get a taste of how all that works. In this video, I'm going to be sculpting this Victorian dame based on the artwork of @SamuelYoonArt on Instagram. I'll be turning this 2D concept into 3D using the software ZBrush, created here on my Cintiq graphics tablet that lets me digitally sculpt my characters starting from a simple sphere. To begin, I will start by blocking out the main shapes of the head. This is the part of the process where we're focusing on big shapes in foundational form. We can't really start putting eyes, nose, lips, etc. on top of this head until we have the basic shapes down. This is the part of the process that I see a lot of people fly past or skip past really quick because they want to get to the fun stuff. You know, you want to start making some eyes, some eyebrows, lashes, etc. Stuff that's really expressive and makes your character feel really good. Well, this is the kind of hard, difficult, albeit a little boring stuff that has to happen in the beginning first before you can get to all the fun stuff. You can see I'm using a lot of brushes to carve and chip away into my surface while also pinching up hard edges. These are what are called plane changes. These are the main turning points in your surface that start blocking out main shapes like the front area or front plane of the face, the side plane, the jawline, the nose, the brow, even stuff like the shape for the back of the skull. But after I get all of those main shapes down, at least for the initial stage, you can see that I'm starting to create some additional pieces of geometry. I've added in things like the ears, a little bit of form there for the torso and clothing, and now I'm starting to work on this hat, as well as the hair that I've inserted or extracted previously. For pretty much everything that I insert here and start shaping up, you'll see that I start from a sphere. This is kind of a preference of mine to get a lot of extra practice and create forms from scratch. After I get a lot of the main shapes down, I grab my reference image and start using that to align here with my actual character sculpt to see what is kind of missing and what is maybe not going to line up here in 3D. Something to keep in mind when you are translating a 2D character into the third dimension is that, well, not every single thing is going to line up. And this is at no fault of the original artist, but when you are creating something in 2D, you can kind of cheat a lot of perspective and, make things that wouldn't necessarily be possible in 3D. A lot of the time, when a 2D artist is creating an artwork, they're not necessarily thinking, hey, there might be someone coming along someday and trying to turn this into a 3D character. Although that is a type of job, not everybody is thinking that way from the get-go. And that means that sometimes things just simply aren't going to translate here to 3D. I'll talk about a few of those as we continue forward, but just to point out one or two here in the early stages, some of the shapes going on with the lips and a little bit of the depth of this character's neck and how far back the hair is create a little bit of an awkward, let's say, profile view here in 3D. So it's my job to take some of those ideas and try to make them work here in the third dimension. As I continue forward, I'm beginning to create some additional pieces of geometry, namely those little ruffles coming out of the front portion of the neck that are going to be tied on and integrated in there later on, but I just need to get the basics down first, so I'm starting to align those again with the reference image just to make sure that that's feeling as close to the 2D artwork as possible. As I mentioned, when you have some things that are a little bit cheated and don't necessarily work in 3D, you want to make up for that by making the other things that do align and can work in 3D as close as possible. And you might be looking at this character if you've been around my channel for a while and thinking to yourself, hey, this seems a little more simple than what you've done recently. You've done some stuff that's a little more complex, more detailed, or maybe a full character, as this is just what's called a bust. Something that's like torso up or rib cage up is often referred to that. And I would argue that simple does not always mean easy. If you have ever attempted to sculpt or create a stylized 3D character, then you are definitely going to understand that simple and easy are not synonyms, in that case at least. And that is because when you have such little in terms of detail, those things that you do have in terms of simplicity need to align as perfectly as possible. The slightest amount of a proportional change can make a massive difference in what your character is going to look like, which is especially true when we're talking about facial features. But before we get to those, let's talk about this hair. I've received a lot of questions about hair, which is why I've created many tutorials about it. A few of those are available on my Patreon at the link in the description. Right now, I'm using what is called a curve tube brush. This is a simple default brush. I'm not using anything custom, at least at the moment, and what I'm doing with that is creating a little bit of taper on the insert. After I create the basic shape, then I am using a custom brush to go over top of those different forms, create some different pinches, some different carving in forms or concavities into my surface, and beginning to shape those up into something that's a little more visually interesting. After I get the basics down there, it's on to the face with a little bit of paint projection. This is a simple and fun technique that you can use to project a 2D image onto your 3D surface. I specifically used it here to make sure that I could align some different aspects for my character's eyebrows, which you can see I am not painting on the surface, I am using actual geometry. And then for the eyes, which are not going to be painted as well, none of these features are, that's gonna look really flat. We're creating a 3D character, we want there to be form. So I'm starting to insert those eyeballs into what is going to be the eye cavity here in just a moment. But of course I need to align those and get those positioned correctly first. I was experiencing a really odd bug going on with my symmetry at this moment with the eyes. I'm not exactly sure what was going on there. I thought maybe it had to do with local symmetry for those that are familiar, but I ended up restarting ZBrush and everything seemed to be working just fine after that. So anyway, now I'm going in and carving in these different sections for the eyes and for the eyelids. I start by marking up my surface with a quick brush stroke so that I can then go in with a mask and begin adjusting my geometry by pushing it in and starting to make the eye cavity. I then go back to the eyeball and start trying to figure out the exact size and proportion for the pupil before going back and working on the eye a little more. When I'm creating eyes, something that I find extremely helpful is to constantly be working with color at the same time, as they create such a drastic difference and importance in the expression of the facial feature that you are creating. This is not true for any of the other facial features, other than maybe the lips. Those are a little more expressive than something like the ears or nose, right? But with the eyes, it is especially important to be working with color at the same time, which is why you can see that I've gone in there and I've created a simple piece of geometry that is going to represent that eyelash. I need to figure out from the get-go how those are going to interact with each other. Then it's down to the lips to begin working on those and starting to get those into position. If you're looking at that face and you're saying, holy crap, this thing is a monster from hell, you are not wrong. During the early stages of sculpting a face, what I'm sure many of you have heard me call the alien phase, it looks like, well, it looks like an alien. It looks like a monstrosity. During these early stages, you don't need to necessarily worry about how things are looking in terms of appeal, but more so be more worried about getting down those larger proportional aspects of your face. You are working on the foundation right now, and when you're creating the foundation of your character or your house or whatever, it's not going to be pretty. You are not sitting there putting the wallpaper on, you're not putting the final details on, you're creating the base for those things to live on later. Then it's over to the ear. We'll ignore that alien face for a little bit and start working on the shapes over here. I was a big fan of this ear shape. I had never sculpted an ear exactly with this shape. I've sculpted, God, too many ears in my time, which is why I actually have a custom brush with a bunch of different ears. I think I have 5 or 6 different ears in there that I use to just insert onto my characters that I'm working on. But this one in particular was very unique, so I had to go in and create that a little more custom from scratch. So shout out to Samuel for the cool ear shape. I'm always a big fan when I find unique shapes that are stylized in a new way that I can try to experiment with. And it gives me some ideas for some more ears that I can create in the future, of course. Then we're over to the eye. As you can see, I'm going to be hand painting this eye while actually sampling the colors from the reference to begin creating these different aspects. So because I projected that paint on here earlier, I can just use the C key on my keyboard, which is the sample key. Either way, I'm going in and just cleaning up this eye, beginning to create the different aspects. So you'll see that I'm going to create a hand-painted highlight over the pupil iris combo there, as well as kind of work on that symmetrically, but I'll be going back in and cleaning both of those eyes up later. Just got to get the basics down first. Then over to the lips to begin refining those and hopefully getting those into a better position. I'll be also cleaning up the paint and working on those a little more. These lips were in particular very difficult. If you look at the image in the top left, you'll notice that they have this very tall triangular shape that creates a really beautiful form in 2D, but it doesn't necessarily translate to 3D incredibly well. This is one of those aspects that I was mentioning earlier, where you have something that doesn't necessarily work in 3D, but it looks so good in 2D that you want to try to implement it as best as you can. So you can do one of two things: make it look completely broken from every single angle except for the kind of final render angle, or that main heroic view is what it's sometimes called. I am not a big fan of that one. Or you can try to make it work from as many views as possible while trying to keep it as close to being on character as you can. That often results in things not lining up exactly the same, but it ends up looking a lot better overall as a 3D character. So that's a lot of work on the face to refine as much of that as I possibly can. I'll be doing more of that as I move forward. You saw me working on the nose, starting to get that into a slightly better position. I'm now doing the same thing with the eyes, going back over these, starting to add in some more information in terms of paint. I'm doing the same thing with the hat. I've left off the frill or frill? Yeah, I don't know. Whatever you would call whatever's hanging down from the back of that hat. Veil? Is that a veil? A reverse veil? I am not a Victorian era woman, so I am unfamiliar with the terminology of this clothing. I'm sure someone in the comments can tell us though. So for this piece of geometry, I am creating a simple plane. Once I align that as best as I can, I'll go back over and start to add some folds to that. But let's get back to the hair. This hair was relatively simple. I didn't add any detail underneath the hat because obviously none of that is going to be seen. It's going to be covered up. So for the most part, I could focus on creating these different chunks of hair right here in the front, mainly conglomerated toward the forehead. You'll notice for the most part, I'm using these larger chunks. Obviously, I'm following the 2D image as best as I can, but when it comes to adding these smaller hairs and smaller details, I'll only do a little bit of that here and there. One of the biggest mistakes that I see with hair is that people will add too many details or too many small strands of hair everywhere. And when you have tons of tiny details all over the place, it really kind of gives your brain mixed signals of where to look. So instead, I tend to add these smaller details in terms of texture and form, and smaller stray strands of hair only towards specific areas where I want your focus. Oftentimes you'll see these placed around the character's front portion of the face, here on the forehead, often in front of the eyes, maybe down toward the mouth, accentuating an expression, anything like that, with the main point to be avoid putting them everywhere. I know it can seem like the right idea initially because hair is made up of all these tiny little strands, but when you're sculpting these forms, you need to think about how you can simplify them to draw your audience's attention to specific areas and also give periods of rest to create balance. Surprisingly, I'm actually almost done working on this character. It feels like it's flown by for me. I don't know if it's felt that way for you, but as I'm working on all the little pieces of hair here, I'm going to finish up with these, just adding in a few more around here, and then I'm going to start working on some folds for the clothing. Hair, folds, all these things are things that I tend to keep toward the very end of my process because the main aspect of what I need to focus my time on happens during the early stages when we're talking about these large forms in the silhouette that are going to make this character feel like the 2D image that I am referencing. These folds are almost like whipped cream and a cherry on top, where they're not a huge deal, but it wouldn't feel like the character if they weren't there. I need to get the main shapes down, and now I can have some fun with this stuff. This is the kind of stuff that I really enjoy doing, where I can just zone out and maybe put a podcast on and just get to work here creating some different organic forms. Of course, I'm still sticking to the 2D image as closely as possible. During this early part though, I like to be a little more rough and messy, and just try to get a general flow down. I'll go back over top of these and soften them up here in a moment. But I like to be really messy with my clay brush during this time and try to get some organic forms, some happy accidents, while working on the same general flow down the major form of the shape. Thinking about how they would tighten up in different areas around the shoulders, or how it might soften in others, creating a more billowy shape, sharpen in other areas. There's a ton of fun stuff that you can do with folds. If you're actually interested, I should say, in learning more about folds, you should check out the links down in the description. I have some tutorials on those as well. I often get asked, how do you know what to sculpt on the other side of the character when you can't see that stuff? You know, the back of the head, the back of the shirt. Well, it's actually a lot easier than it looks because I'm already given the answer. I can see the front portion of the shirt, and I understand what the shape language is for the character, the different flow of form, and the different shapes that are generally being created there. And then I simply need to copy paste that to the back. Well, it's not necessarily that easy. I do have to go in and sculpt it by hand, but I'm using the same idea and techniques that I did on the front and just translating those same ideas to the back. So because I've done it once, it's pretty easy for me to replicate that idea on the back and use my experience and knowledge of sculpting many folds in the past and project that idea to the parts that we can't see, at least in the 2D image. And then finishing up there with some last minute folds, of course, to those billowing pieces of fabric on the front, working on some different areas, just cleaning up all these little last minute details that bring us to my favorite part, and I'm sure it's your favorite part as well, or at least so many of you that skip here to the end, the final renders. Hello skippers, as I love to say here at the end of my videos, glad to see you, but hey, don't fret, if you like what you see, I think you'll also really enjoy learning more about the process of how I made this character. Consider going back through and giving it a watch if you did just so happen to skip here to the end. Yes, I caught you, it happens every video, no hard feelings. I appreciate your interest in my art either way. If you'd like to learn more about digital sculpting, check out the links below in the description. My Gumroad is where you can find all of my tutorials and my custom brushes. The Appeal Academy is like an online university that includes an ever-expanding massive library of videos on everything I know about creating appealing characters. And if you're not ready for that yet, I recommend checking out my Patreon, which is also conveniently where you can get access to my Discord. Well, hey, thank you so much for watching. If you're new around here and you enjoyed this video, the way you can show that appreciation is by clicking that subscribe button. I appreciate your like-clicking generosity. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.